Is it the end of free trade as we know it? After a campaign where he promised the return of jobs lost abroad to outsourcing, Donald Trump announcing that on day one of his presidency, he'll scrap the Trans-Pacific Partnership, an agreement signed back in February that would lift tariffs between 12 nations that range from the US and Mexico to Japan, Australia, Malaysia, and Vietnam. TPP, yet to be ratified, it includes provisions on intellectual property, labor rights, state-owned company reform. Will U.S. workers be better off with it or without it? The news deflating spirits for some, but not all. Attending an Asia-Pacific APEC summit in Peru, Russia and China, both left out of TPP, see reasons to smile, particularly Beijing, which is now touting its own free trade deal that would include the likes of India and Japan, but leave out the United States. Could the latest turn of events lead to a new era of protectionism or even a trade war? And which is the better path to redressing the imbalances of globalization that have so many, in so many nations, voting for populists? Today in the WENTE debate, the prospect of trans-Pacific protectionism. With us from Washington, Mireya Solis, Japan Studies Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institute. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Nice to see Ralph Winnie again. Ralph Winnie, China Director at the Eurasian Business Coalition, which puts together U.S. business firms with those in places like the former Soviet Union and China.
Glad to be with you.
From London, Linda Wei, who teaches at the London Business School. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
And here in the studio, someone who's not from a nation that's privy to the TPP, a European, André Lozekrug-Pietri, who is with the venture capital firm A Capital. You spend half your time in Beijing. We'll be getting your take on how it's all going to impact Europe, what's done and undone with these trade deals. The WENTE debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. It was a statement televised from Trump Tower Monday that cast a shadow over the APEC summit that was wrapping up in Peru's capital. Diptyque Laurent has the story.
Donald Trump's first day in office looks set to deliver on key electoral promises. In a video released by his transition team, the president-elect said he would scrap the Trans-Pacific Partnership, an ambitious free trade deal spanning 12 countries who make up 40% of the world's economy.
I am going to issue our notification of intent to withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a potential disaster for our country. Instead, we will negotiate fair bilateral trade deals that bring jobs and industry back onto American shores.
The TPP aims to remove tariff barriers to trade between members, but Trump argues that it would harm American jobs by putting foreign interests first. The Republican leader also wants to restart major energy industries, including coal and shale gas, which he promises will bring in millions of jobs. This will be sure to satisfy blue-collar workers who backed Trump in the presidential election 2 weeks ago, won over by his protectionist policies and his promise to keep jobs in America.
My agenda will be based on a simple core principle: putting America first. Whether it's producing steel, building cars, or curing disease, I want the next generation of production and innovation to happen right here on our great homeland, America.
On immigration, Trump said he would pursue a crackdown on abuses of visa programs. There was no mention, however, of his plans to build a wall with Mexico, kick out millions of undocumented workers, or restrict Muslim immigration.
Mireya Solis, let me begin with you. Is this a good idea to scrap TPP?
I don't think so. I think this really marks an abdication of leadership for the United States in Asia Pacific. This was an agreement that was actually going to generate significant economic benefits. There were many studies conducted, and it will have a small but nevertheless positive effect in job creation and raising wages. So I think if you think about the opportunities for American workers, this is an agreement that was custom tailored to actually promote the areas of comparative advantage of the United States in the technology sector, in the digital economy, services, agriculture, and advanced manufacturing. So both on economic terms and geopolitical terms, with this decision, the United States is embarking on a new era where it seems to give its back on multilateral initiatives to promote economic cooperation, and I don't think that can be good news.
Intellectual property, labor rights, those some of the things touted in the deal, Ralph Winnie. How are you going to safeguard those without it?
Well, I think Donald Trump is going to negotiate new trade deals that are going to be in the beneficial interests of the American people. What people in Europe need to understand is, in many ways, there were many interests, not just Donald Trump and some Republicans that were opposed to TPP, but also Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders for the reasons of concern towards the American worker. And as we see in the industrial Midwest, they are lacking jobs. And this idea of globalization has really hurt the American industrial worker. So it's going to be incumbent on Donald Trump to renegotiate.
Explain that for us. How does scrapping TPP bring more jobs back to the United States?
Well, he's going to negotiate what he considers better deals that will force manufacturing to come back into the United States, to lower the corporate income tax, and to be able to work together with other nations in ways that will stimulate and grow the economy in the United States. The idea is people have to want to invest in the United States, and we've got to reduce regulations. We've got to ensure that coal as an industry thrives in the United States. We've got to grow and to continue to develop the shale and oil and gas markets in the United States, which the Chinese and the Russians have been wanting to exploit, but because of environmental and other regulations in this country, we're sort of hamstrung in developing and promoting our energy industry.
When you say better deals, are you talking about multilateral deals like the one that's in the process of being scrapped, or will it just be one-to-one bilateral deals between nations?
I think that remains to be seen. I think what Donald Trump has said is he wants fair trade. He's not opposed to engaging and working with other nations. The number one interest is the American people, and ensuring that these deals that he does sign with other nations will ensure jobs for American workers.
Linda Ray,
so that's why I think
let me bring in Linda Ray on this. Linda, are you convinced by Ralph Winnie that better deals can be fleshed out?
I think it depends on how you define a better deal. So one of the things that's happened with globalization is that, of course, it's good for the economy as a whole, but there's always a distributional impact on industries and workers. So in other words, quite a lot of trade deals that America does with countries which have lower standards of living means there's downward pressure on wages of workers in the traded sectors, meaning American manufacturing workers, for instance, are a good example of the wider. It's not the only reason, I should hasten to add. American median wages have stagnated for about 30 years, 40 years or so, and there's lots of reasons behind it. But I think globalization does play a role. So if the aim is to protect wages, then I suppose President-elect Trump, if he were to do trade deals with countries of comparable income levels, then that effect is lesser. But I think the key here is still, is President Trump going to be able to get more benefits from trade, which tends to come from trading with nations that you can have which are quite different from your own country, because that tends to mean you can import things that you need, you can sell more to global markets, in markets which are underserved. So there's a reason why these trade deals are big and regional and encompass countries of a lot of different income levels, because they tend to get the most benefit. But as we've already seen, I think not just in America, but also in other parts of the developed world, the unequal gains from trade liberalization has really put pressure on politicians who feel they need to address better the distribution effects of trade. But unfortunately, they're doing it via trade policy rather than, say, domestic policy, government spending, thinking about how you address it from that perspective, and asking probably too much of trade agreements, which at their core is really just about opening up markets, because globally, trade is not free. You have to have a trade agreement to get into another market.
André Pietri, the French and the French were among those who've shot down a similar trade deal that was in the works with the United States of late. TPP, is this good or bad news for Europe, or Europe doesn't care either way?
Well, I think it's bad news because that means that TTIP, which is the transatlantic partnership, is probably dead also. Not only dead because of the removal of the TPP, probably by President-elect Trump, but also because, as you saw, the agreement with Canada was already an extremely complicated thing to bring to birth. What I'm amazed is that actually it is populist leaders who have actually understood something very fundamental, is that these trade deals are good for the economy, for the GDP, for the macro numbers, but more and more what we need to do in a globalized world where there is a consensus that more open markets are a symbol of progress, but there are a lot of people who are left behind. And what I think is a failure of European leadership in particular, but probably also of the previous US leadership, was to explain and probably to target specifically those who are left behind, because as we all know in a democracy, those who are left behind are much more frustrated and able to...
Can you make a trade deal that prevents these economic imbalances, that stops companies from moving their factory to somewhere else where the labor is cheaper?
Well, I would say that maybe to answer on this TPP topic specifically, and having lived in China a long time, I think China is the big winner of that, because TPP was, and it's not very politically correct to say that, kind of an anti-China trade zone to kind of counterbalance the rise of China. So China must be absolutely delighted about that, and I'm not sure it's good for the American economy. But what you can do is use trade for what it's good, which is export-oriented industries, and then have specific policies which are targeted at steel workers, textile workers, and trying to kind of reskill, make more education, instead of trying to subsidize or having artificial trade barriers or tariff barriers on industries which probably are either obsolete or need to be moved to I would say, emerging countries.
All right, we're going to talk about that point a little bit later on again when we talk about the North American Free Trade Agreement, which is perhaps under discussion. The deal needed the ratification of the U.S. Senate. As our panel's saying, it's effectively dead in the water now. That verdict, by the way, also coming from Japan's Prime Minister after last week visiting the president-elect at Trump Tower.
At the meeting of the 12 countries, we've had no discussions aimed at the entry into force of the TPP without the United States. TPP would make no sense without the United States. It's impossible to renegotiate it, and it would destabilize the basic balance of interests.
Mireya Solis, your reaction?
Well, I mean, clearly there's disappointment. Obviously, Japan put so much effort into the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It was so closely linked to its own domestic reform efforts. It was seen as part of deepening the alliance. So clearly the Trump decision marks a big disappointment, big frustration, and I think that's reflected in the Prime Minister's statement. Now, I think that this is a fast-moving scene. And from what I read also, the Japanese government, it's about to finish the ratification procedures of TPP. It has not said it's stopping those. On the contrary, it's continuing ahead. And I think that probably we'll see some reassessment as to whether it's worth their while to talk about remaining TPP members, as to whether they should continue to move forward with the ratification process just among the remaining 11 countries.
You heard what Andre said a minute ago, Mireya, that, this was a club that left out China. Can Japan and the likes of Vietnam, Malaysia make a deal without either China or the United States?
Well, I think so. I mean, obviously, they're still negotiating with China in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, but that's going to be a very different type of agreement. One thing that is critical for Japan, does not apply to Vietnam, is the rule book of the TPP. The idea is that Japan is one of the leading countries in global value chains, and many of these rules are designed to promote the operation of these global value chains, something that Japanese trade diplomacy tried arduously for over a decade in its negotiations with Southeast Asian countries, and Japan was basically coming empty-handed. Now you have that rule book. Are you going to throw it out? Some countries, New Zealand, Australia, for example, are also talking to each other to see whether it's worth their while or not. You know, I think that for Vietnam, the costs of TPP are very high. You are talking about labor laws, changes to labor laws. And of course, the compensation was access to the huge American market. You take that out, well, it might not be so promising. But countries that already had trade agreements with the United States, those market access talks were basically not reopened. So they still have that access through the prior FTAs, and they have to consider whether moving forward with TPP in a context where they're worried about the future of free trade makes sense or not. And some of them may actually say we have a systemic interest in seeing some liberalizing initiatives going forward, coming to fruition.
Ralph Winnie, your reactions to what we're hearing from our panel about how, in fact, I think it was the Prime Minister of New Zealand who said free trade is going to go on with or without the United States. What's your reaction to the fact that, well, there will still be deals made, just that the U.S. won't be in the tent?
I'm sure other countries will try and enact free trade deals. I think a lot is going to depend on Trump's engagement with China. I think the first meeting that Trump has with the president of China is going to be key. By pulling out of the TPP, Trump has in effect extended an olive branch to saying he's willing to work with China. That'll be very interesting to see how the Chinese are going to react to that. Certainly, people on Capitol Hill, many in the Republican Party, feel that Trump has made a major mistake and that this emboldens China, especially given China's incursions in the South China Sea. So how Trump engages with China in terms of putting together a deal between China and the U.S. that benefits American workers is going to be the key. Speaking of the Japanese Prime Minister, I think he was taken very much by surprise because in his meeting with Trump, he thought that he had been able to soften Trump's stance on pulling out of TPP and was deeply shocked when this happened. But I think the president of Japan should also recognize that there are people in his own country that are opposed to the TPP. There have been demonstrations in both Japan and New Zealand against the deal. And they've got to really worry about their political futures. This is what we were starting to see in many other countries, is the rise of populist leaders, because the current leaders in those particular countries are sort of ignoring the will of their own people.
All right, we're gonna pick up on those points. We're gonna pick up on those points when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.